roll back voting rights, and over 30 have been signed into law. The freedom to vote is under attack. As we've seen in states like Georgia, Florida, Iowa, Montana, and last month in Texas, we are up. Those of us who believe in democracy are up against a coordinated effort to limit the freedom to vote. This demands a federal response. And by the way, the Constitution is clear. The Constitution says that Congress has the right to make or alter the laws regarding federal elections. It couldn't be clearer. It's been upheld over and over again. And I believe that provision was in there designed to help us in situations just like this. As chairwoman of the Senate Rules Committee, which has jurisdiction over federal elections and campaign finance law, I work to ensure voting rights are a priority. One of our first hearings this year was on the For the People Act, and I took the Rules Committee on the floor for a field hearing for the first time in 20 years. And we have done events all over the country, making sure that we get the information firsthand about what's happening to roll back voting rights. In Georgia alone, and I was there with Senators Warnock and Ossoff, we found out that not only does that law that got signed into law by their governor, not only does it say no water or food when you're in line from volunteers, it also says that you've got to put your birth date on the outside of the inner envelope. You know what people do? They understandably write the date that they're filing their ballot. It says that you can't vote on weekends in the runoff period. It says you can't register vote during the runoff period. It says that there are limitations when it comes to vote by mail and ballot drop-off boxes. That's what we're dealing with here. There was one bill that passed through the legislature in Wisconsin, luckily vetoed by the governor there, that said there was only one drop-off box in the entire city of Milwaukee. This is, to quote a court years ago when dealing with a North Carolina law, this is discrimination with surgical precision. I've also talked with Democratic and Republican election officials across the country about how we can safeguard our elections. And I've heard from Americans, like the veteran who served in our country only to face an hours-long line to vote early when he saw elderly voters leave because they couldn't stand long in the hot sun. That's why we need this bill. The Freedom to Vote Act builds on the framework put forward by Senator Manchin in June and includes so many of the key reforms in the For the People Act that Senator Merkley and I led. Automatic voter registration in all states through the Department of Motor Vehicles. That's in the Freedom to Vote Act, requiring all states to offer same-day voter registration and 2 weeks of early voting, including weekends. That's in the Freedom to Vote Act. Ensuring voters in all states can request a mail-in ballot without an excuse and have ample access to drop boxes. Requiring hand-marked paper ballots and reliable post-election audits, as well as authorizing election security grants for states to modernize voting systems. The Disclose Act, which makes it very clear where all this dark money is coming from in our politics, hugely popular with the public, as are, by the way, the voting provisions. The Honest Ads Act is in this bill. A ban on partisan gerrymandering. Earlier this month, we also introduced the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act in the Senate, legislation that complements the Freedom to Vote Act and that would restore and strengthen key portions of the Voting Rights Act, including provisions to prohibit discriminatory practices that keep people from the ballot box. This week, we took an important step toward passing legislation to protect the fundamental freedoms. But Republicans are once again talking about blocking even debating the Freedom to Vote Act, as well as, by the way, they have not signed up on the John Lewis Act, and we should be doing both. Every single Democrat has united behind the need to ensure our elections are fair and that all Americans can vote in the way that works best for them. We're united, and we are committed to getting this done. I know that passing voting rights legislation isn't going to be easy, and the fight has just begun. There's too much on the line to stop now. It was over 10 months ago that a violent mob of insurrectionists stormed the Capitol. I will always remember walking to the House chamber at 3:30 a.m., shattered glass from broken windows strewn in the hallway, with Senators Blunt and Vice President Pence, And with us were 2 young women who carried the mahogany boxes holding the state's electoral votes that still had not been counted. We returned to do our jobs that night, and we made clear to everyone democracy will prevail. And then 2 weeks later, I stood on the inauguration platform with President Biden and Vice President Harris under that bright blue sky. And by the way, on TV, maybe you couldn't see it, but there was still spray paint at the bottom of the columns and in front of the makeshift windows we had in place. I said this is the day our democracy picks itself up, brushes off the dust, and does what America always does, goes forward as a nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We cannot do that if Americans are actively being disenfranchised. The reason you were meeting today is the simple idea that Americans must be able to freely choose their elected officials. Whether people are trying to upend our democracy through an insurrection or trying to limit the right to vote, it's all about, for them, taking people's rights away. In the words of my friend Reverend Warnock, some people don't want some people to vote. We must keep up this fight. And in the end, with the help of you and millions of others from across the country, we must prevail. Our very democracy depends on it. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Senator. And I'm now going to ask our host, Mayor, visionary of this whole concept, to come up and make a special introduction. Mayor Hancock.
Well, good afternoon. I know we're wearing you out, and we appreciate you all being here for this afternoon session. We have a special guest who's come in. He's a dear friend, and he wanted to come and welcome you all to the state of Colorado. Please welcome our governor, the Honorable Jared Polis.
Good to see you. Thanks for meeting us. Thank you all for joining us. And thank you, Mayor Hancock and Mayor Lightfoot, leaders from around the country. No topic could be more important than the integrity of our democratic republic. It's about our right to be self-governed. It's the reason in 1776, some very brave men put their name on a piece of paper that they knew could cost them their lives. They believe that the only legitimate government is one that governs by the consent of the people. And that's a core value. You can be conservative, you can be liberal, you can be socialist, you can be libertarian. But if you believe that the people are sovereign, that the right to vote is a key right, not just our right, but something that we must protect and cherish and inculcate in people as a responsibility. A republic if you can keep it, as Ben Franklin said. I also want to acknowledge, I think you've heard from our Secretary of State, Jenna Griswold, who has also been a champion working with Mayor Hancock, many others across our state, on making sure that people are able to cast their vote safely. When I saw that this was on my schedule today, it reminded me that me and Marlon still need to vote. I need to cast my vote in Boulder, where I live. We have our ballots, and we have to fill them out, and we'll look forward to doing that together around the table this weekend with our 10-year-old and our 7-year-old, so they can see firsthand the power of voting, the power of a democracy. And it's okay if Marlon and I don't agree on every issue. We often don't, but it'll be a good discussion. And bringing that civics lesson to the kitchen table is what families across Colorado have been doing. As long as I can remember, people, last election, it was strange when people were talking about mail-in voting as an issue in other parts of the country, because that's the only way we've done it in Colorado for decades. I don't even remember, maybe when I was 19 or something, I voted once at a precinct polling place, but I really don't even remember ever voting in person here, because even before they were the default, most people voted mail. I certainly did, and I don't even remember another way of doing it. As a result of some of the things you've heard that Colorado is doing, that the city of Denver, the mayor, the clerk, the state are doing, Colorado was the second state for voter turnout last election. 86% of registered voters had their voices heard, 3.3 million votes. You know what? It's not good enough. We want to be number one, right, Mayor? But we are proud of that. And, you know, it's because we wanted to meet people where they are. And you know, people want to be part of our democracy. They want to participate, but people are busy, especially these days, right? Might be working 2 jobs or might be working long hours and have to pick up the kids from school and take them to a soccer game. And making sure that you meet them where they are and say, you know what? You don't have to give up your life to vote. We want to make sure you can do it in a way that's consistent with your life, right? And hopefully a way that you can help share those civic values with your next generation of kids if you have them around the kitchen table, with your spouse, with your parents. What can you bring in terms of a shared civic experience, and how can we form that out of voting? You know, our experience in the last election in Colorado and elections before also affirm what we already knew, that the mayor and I hope you take back, that our participation-friendly election system is also safe and secure here in Colorado. We've known for years what much of the country did for the first time in 2020 when it came to mail-in ballots. We have a lot of great rules and laws around voter convenience and safety, everything from motor voter, where you register with your license, to if you still forget to register in all the myriad ways, you don't lose your right to vote. You can still vote on election day at a polling place, right? And if you really don't like the mail, you don't have to vote that way. You can vote in a number of super voting election sites right up until election day, including registration. And some people do that, and that's fine. That's fine. You know, today's society and world is all about convenience. I mean, my good, you can order anything you want in your own home. You expect it there, not even the next day sometimes. You want it there within a few hours, right? And that's just become what consumers demand. And we have to, again, meet them where they are with regard to the voting experience and participating in our democracy. Because no matter what party you belong to, no matter what your ideology is, we believe that we're better off that we live in a system where the people have a say and the people have the power. And the more people participate, the stronger and more united we are as a people. You know, during my 10 years in Congress, I became good friends with the late John Lewis. And about 10 years ago, he said, "My dear friends, your vote is precious, sacred. It's the most powerful nonviolent tool we have to create a more perfect union." He has been a hero to countless Americans, certainly to me. You know, when I was elected, there were a number of legendary members of Congress, people like Barney Frank and so forth. But the only one that I was nervous around, Mayor Hancock, and I was just so awe to meet was John Lewis. And his inspirational words are more true today than ever before. And conversations like the one that you're having today with Mayor Hancock, I see Mayor Gradisar Pueblo here as well, are really a key part to strengthening our democracy, protecting our democracy, something that we didn't even think we would have to be talking about in this day and age, but yes, protecting the essence of our democracy for all the generations to come. And I want to thank you for having that conversation about how to protect everybody's vote. I'm also excited to welcome you to the great state of Colorado. I hope that some of you enjoy our mountain communities and opportunities to recreate during what will be a beautiful fall weekend. I think we're expecting weather in the 60s over the next few days, and I hope you get the chance to see our changing leaves, still in the low areas, still changing in the high country, exploring some of the great things that give us such pride to be Coloradans. Thank you for your important work. Nothing could be more integral than the work that you're doing to protect our democracy, to ensure that we persevere for the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you again, Governor, and Mayor, thank you for inviting the governor to share those kind words. We're going to move on with the process of building our plan. And in getting to build this plan that we are working on as we get ready to leave, we think it was important to have a congressional member here that is really leading it in the House and on behalf of Americans, actually. And so we are proud today to have Representative Nakima Williams. Y'all can give her a hand. I heard yes. Representative Williams took the oath of office after the passing of the great civil rights leader, activist John Lewis, and has been a fierce advocate for social justice throughout her political as well as professional career. I had a chance to meet her earlier today, and it's just such an honor to be able to meet her and be there with her as we do our work as city leaders in Washington, D.C. Representative, welcome, and thank you so much, because you're going to really challenge us as we move forward. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm a little short, so I have to make sure you can see me over this podium. So I was talking to the governor, and he said the only time he was ever nervous around someone was when he was around Congressman Lewis, and so imagine succeeding him in the United States Congress. No pressure, y'all, but I got a lot of work to do, and I have an obligation to continue to stand up for voting rights in this country. Thank you, Mayor Hancock, for your hospitality, almost like Southern hospitality, y'all. He's laid out the red carpet for us. And I know that Mayor Lightfoot couldn't be here with us, but she sent us that Garrett's popcorn, and so she is with us in presence. Y'all, I'm Congresswoman Nakima Williams, and I proudly represent Georgia's 5th Congressional District. I'm proud to be here today to have this conversation and this national convening on voting rights, because y'all, our democracy is on the line. And everyone in this room, by being here, understands exactly what's at stake. In the 2020 election, a record-shattering 4.9 million Georgians made their voices heard when they cast their ballots. And then 6 weeks later, y'all, Georgians did it again, showing up in record numbers for the Senate runoff that literally changed the course of America. In response, Georgia saw some of the harshest voter suppression tactics that we've seen in decades. Earlier this year, Georgia signed into law SB 202, or as we call it back home, Jim Crow 2.0. SB 202 erodes crucial safeguards for independent elections administrators and gives state election boards the power to arbitrarily replace county boards of elections. Y'all, we have 159 counties in the state of Georgia, but they're only targeting one county, Fulton County, that is the home to the city of Atlanta, my home county. You may have heard that SB 202 even makes it a crime to give water to people standing in line to vote. And I know it's a little nippy up here in Colorado, but if you've ever spent a summer down in Georgia, our primaries get pretty hot. And our primaries are, well, they were in June in 2020, and now it is literally a crime to give someone a bottle of water as they stand in line to cast their ballot. Make no mistake, we saw this response because millions of Georgians who look like me showed up to vote in 2020. But it's not just Georgia, y'all. We saw it in Texas, we saw it in Florida, Pennsylvania. Across this country, we're seeing an unprecedented assault on voting rights, and we can't just simply organize our way out of it. To change the course, it's time for Congress to protect everyone's right to vote, and we can't delay. This year alone, 389 voter suppression bills were introduced in state legislatures across 48 states. That's nearly every state in this country. We need a national standard so that your level of access to the ballot no longer depends on your zip code. Just like you can go to your favorite fast food restaurant. I was in the airport last night and I knew when I went to McDonald's, if I ordered that chicken nugget meal, I knew exactly how many chicken nuggets I would get. I knew I would get fries and I could get a drink. We should have the same standard access to the ballot that we have like at fast food restaurants. It doesn't matter if I'm in Denver, if I'm in Minneapolis, like I was stuck in the airport last night, or back home in Atlanta. I know when I order that meal at McDonald's, there's gonna be a standard to it, and I know what I'm gonna get. But it's not the same for voting. We go state by state, and you just don't know what your access is gonna be. We must restore the full strength of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. In Congress, I'm working on both by helping to pass H.R. 1, the For the People Act, and H.R. 4, the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. Y'all, the House did its part by passing both of these landmark pieces of voting rights legislation. And while the Senate has a big step, they've done the Freedom to Vote Act. You just heard Senator Klobuchar. They had a vote yesterday. But y'all, we have to make sure that we are not letting up. We saw what happened yesterday. None of this is about power or advantage. This is about everyone's voice being heard. When I think about the urgent need to protect full access to the ballot, I think about one of my elderly blind constituents, Miss Robbie. The only way Miss Robbie was able to vote in the 2020 elections was with the assistance of her friend. But y'all, now, under Georgia's SB 202, that's no longer allowed. That's against the law. We owe it to Robbie and so many others to make it easier to vote, not harder. Voter suppression silences the most marginalized voices, the ones that we need to hear the most. And though it doesn't look like a poll tax or counting jelly beans in a jar anymore, the intent is still the same, to suppress the voices of those most marginalized. When I talk about protecting voting rights, I often remind my colleagues, and I want to remind you today, y'all, this is our civil rights moment. If you ever wondered what you would have done during the civil rights movement, this is your time to find out. And since we're here discussing voting rights, I assume that you're all ready to get into some good trouble and to find a way to get in the way. And I'm looking forward to doing it with you every step of the way. Thank you.
One more time for Congresswoman Nakima Williams. Just a tremendous man. Georgia has truly blessed us with appropriate replacement in the next generation following the great John Lewis. This next panel, she set the stage so very well, is about talking about the other disenfranchised groups and equity efforts that are going on around the country. And I'm excited with this panel, so we're going to get started. And I'm going to bring up a dear friend and a legend in our time. Actually, I'm going to start here. I'm going to stay on this end. And I want her to come up. She is, I call her the queen, Carlotta LaNier, the youngest of the Little Rock Nine. Yes, on your feet.
Thank you.
Oh, you sit right there.
All right. Hello, thank you.
She was the youngest of the Little Rock Nine group. In 1957, were black students they were the first black students who ever attend classes at Little Rock Central High School in Little Rock, Arkansas. She is the first black female to graduate from Central High School. She went on to attend Michigan State University for 2 years before coming to Colorado, where she finished her degree and studies at Colorado State College, now the University of Northern Colorado. She has been so involved in not only the national Little Rock Nine efforts and their foundation, she's the president of the foundation of Little Rock Nine, right? Yeah. But she's been involved in so many things here. But in 1999, LaNier, along with the other Little Rock Nine participants, were awarded the Congressional Gold Medal by President Bill Clinton. Once again, let's welcome, and she was also inducted in 2014, she was inducted in the Colorado Women's Hall of Fame and the National Women's Hall of Fame in 2015. Once again, let's welcome Carlotta LaNier. Bring up John C. Yang, President Executive Director of the Asian Americans Advancing Justice. John leads the organization's efforts to fight civil rights and empower Asian Americans to create a more just America. He does this through public policy, advocacy, education, litigation. His extensive legal background enables advancing justice for everyone and creating systemic policies, program, and legislative attempts and pushing back against those policies that discriminate against and marginalize Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders. John co-founded the Asian Pacific American Legal Resource Center, a nonprofit organization dedicated to addressing the direct service legal needs of Asian Pacific Americans in D.C. metropolitan area. He's an experienced attorney. He's spent 2 decades in policy, litigation, corporate expertise. He graduated with honors from George Washington Law School. We're not dealing with any light people up here, y'all. And where he served on the George Washington Law Review and Mute Court. Once again, John Ling, welcome.
Very good.
I am so excited to have Dawn Howard here. Dawn is Director of Community Organizing, Colorado Cross Disability Coalition. She is Director of organizing, as I said. She works with matching advocates and volunteer interests with opportunities to make systems work for people with disability. In her free time, Dawn loves to write poetry, spend time with her friends and family, and take long walks. Welcome, Dawn Howard. So glad you're here. And last but not least, we bring up Rob Richie. He's President and CEO of FairVote. In 1992, he helped found the organization, and he was installed as its President and CEO in 2018. He has been involved in helping to develop and win and implement ranked choice voting in states in more than 20 cities, fair representation voting system in numerous Voting Rights Act cases, the National Popular Vote Plan in 16 states, and voter access proposals like voter pre-registration and automatic voter registration. You can see this guy on just about every media outlet you find, but the thing I found most interesting is that you had authored 11 books.
Or had
been a part
contributions
of contributing to the authoring of 11. Like, when did you find time to co-author all those books? But we are so excited to welcome Richie, who's also had some effort in the electoral college reform and whose votes count, which is about fair representation in voting. Welcome, Rob Richie. You know, we chose to have this very unique panel because when we talk about voter rights and what's happening around the country, automatically people think the traditional civil rights, African Americans, and there are so many disparate groups that are being impacted by what's happening around the country. But I thought it was so appropriate to start with Carlotta LaNier. And I just want to tell you the story when I called her a few days ago and said, she had already told the staff, no, I don't want to speak. I'm coming, but I don't want to speak. And we have a history, so I said, let me give her a call. And she says, Mike, I don't know if I have anything of value to bring to this conversation. And those of us who are really close to have studied the civil rights movement know better than that, right? And I said, it took every bit of courage I had to say to her, I respectfully disagree. I think your voice is extremely powerful. Could it be extremely powerful in this movement? And that's why I want to ask this question put to you, Ms. LaNier. You know, you grew up as part of this most significant moment in movement in America's history. As you think back on all the folks that you dealt with, I remember seeing pictures with you and Dr. King, and he walking you into the school or walking you to school or helping prepare you all to school, Ernie Green and the likes, John Lewis, Rosa Parks. As you reflect back on those moments, you think about what's happening today to roll back voter rights. How does it strike you?
It does not feel good at all. It feels like the old Jim Crow days as I grew up. It's taking us back, and I feel that there's been some complacency among citizens and so forth. You know, I came along when with the understanding that you were to do better than your parents. And my parents taught me the values of such as ownership, such as voting, all importantly, education. And today, it's a situation where it has to be immediate, where during my time and the efforts that we put in, we knew that each day was just a part of getting to the end of the road, if any way possible. So you put in the work every day. And I think that Dr. King and Medgar Evers and all the other people that are gone from us today are probably wondering, you know, who dropped the baton? Who dropped the baton? And we've got to pick that baton up and dust it off and get that foundation back to where we were before, to move forward. And, you know, I remember sitting at the Arkansas State Press newspaper with my mother, who sat and sold poll tax to citizens there in Little Rock so that they would have that right to vote. So I grew up with that. And I expect those sort of things to continue. Another thing that is bothering me is that civics is not a part of our educational system. And I think that we need to invest in that again. So those are the things that I think about as I see things on television today and the news reports and so forth. It's bothersome. It makes me, takes me back, you know, 60, 70 years ago.
So as you have observed, you asked the question, who dropped the baton? As you observe us and the generations today, what do you think took our attention away from the fight?
Well, I don't know. The doors, you know, I came along with the understanding too that if the door is, be prepared to go through the door where there's a crack in the door or it's flown wide open. So we had a crack, okay, and then in other instances the door was a little bit more open. I think when it got too wide open, we got complacent again. So in other words, it was a part of just constantly, well, things are better now, and then we can move forward, and we have forgotten what we learned at that table in those homes, that when we discussed what was important to the family, to the community, to the state, to the country, to understand our responsibilities in all of those levels.
Let me ask you this question. I'm going to read it verbatim. In 2008 and 2020 elections, BIPOC communities voted in record numbers. As a result, our nation's first African-American president was elected in 2008, and record number of people of color and women were elected to Congress and local offices around the country, and also removed an embattled but heavily funded and entrenched president from office.
Right.
Do you think these events are what is prompting these new restrictive voting laws?
I do. You know, it took more than just the Democrats to put President Barack Obama in that position. It took independents. It took free-thinking Republicans to do that. And this is supposed to be nonpartisan. So I put that, I say that again, that Republicans need to regain their party.
Right.
They really need to step forward and speak up. And whether you're here today or closet Republican, I say step up and have your voice heard. But yes, I do feel that because President Obama was elected and it took so many different groups of people to put him in that office, that there is this fear of power, that they have lost their power. And, you know, it's unfounded fears as far as I'm concerned. you know, there are people who think that, you know, Democrats don't go out and rah, rah, rah. You know, we'll get something done, and then we move on to the next issue. But we have to keep those pluses in front of people. And that is what is happening on the other group of people who want to change things or take it back to the Jim Crow days, because they have this fear of losing their power. We don't want to, no one is out there to put the thumb on them and hold them back as they have tried to hold others back, people of color, indigenous people, you know, blacks, indigenous people of color. That is not the way that we gathered this country.
Yeah.
And so that's pretty much how I see this whole thing.
Phenomenal. John, you spent extensive amount of time working on policies and programs and advocacy for the Asian and Pacific Islander communities. In this era, how are the Asian and Pacific Islander communities viewing the acts that are taking place around the country today around voter rights?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, Mayor Hancock. And first of all, thank you for inviting me. Thank you for talking about other vulnerable communities. I think it's important to recognize for the Asian American community, look, we recognize the tremendous contributions of the African American community for establishing the right to vote and all of that rich history that is there. And for us, it is part about carrying that baton forward and carrying on that legacy. So how the Asian American community thinks about voting, it's important to remember, we're probably the newest citizens, so to speak, here in the United States. If you go back to the 1960 census, we're only 0.5% of the population. You fast forward to 2020, we're about 7% of the population now, about 23 million here in the United States. So in that sense, the right to vote is very new to us, but that's also part of the reason why we came to the United States. If you think about the countries that we came from, communist China, Vietnam, even Korea, which is now a democracy, but at the time was fairly autocratic in the way they ran the country. So we came here because we believed in democracy. We came here as part of the civil rights movement, actually. The Immigration and Nationality Act of 1965 gave us that opportunity to have this ability to come to the United States. So number one, sort of the right to vote and democracy in general has clear resonance for us. And that's why what we have seen in these last few years in particular has been so deeply troubling for our community. Because for us, this notion of a democracy is under attack. The other thing that I would couple with that is, as probably most of you know, the last 2 years has been tremendously traumatic for the Asian American community with respect to anti-Asian hate. And so for us as well, now we want our voice to be heard. You know, oftentimes you talk about the critical mass that is needed before you have political empowerment, right? And we feel like we're getting to that critical mass. We're getting to the point that we're at a point that we have 20 members of Congress in the House and the Senate, which is, for us, a new high water mark. Still not representative, but a new high water mark. And so when we see our rights being taken away, where we've seen gains, we are also in the same boat. It's like, there's something happening here that is just as we're at the cusp of power, just as we're the ability to have liberation and self-determination, it's being taken away. And so that's how we're feeling in this moment.
Yeah, you know, the Asian community is the fastest growing demographic in America right now. And since 1992, we started seeing a trend where the Asian community started to shift its voting preference. And certainly during 2000 and 2008, there was a seismic shift of Asian preference from decidedly Republican to decidedly Democrat. And I'm wondering, you know, if you're grouped in with everybody else now, you're part of the problem. Did the Asian community say we may have created this situation because of our change in preference? And what were those things? I mean, can you identify what is it that has the Asian community changing its preference in terms of voting?
Sure. Number one is, you hear this, people talk about this all the time. It's like that, well, we haven't changed, the parties have shifted. Certainly for the Asian American community, that's how we feel. Number one is, if you go back to 1992 and before, Asian Americans, you know, there was a soft plurality or soft majority that voted Republican. Why? Again, you remember what countries they came from. They were communist countries that they were trying to escape. And the Republican Party was seen as being more anti-communist than the Democratic Party.
Right.
So that's what caused them to associate with the Republican Party, vote Republican. But then as time has elapsed, and if you think about 2008, right, in 2006, 2007, President George W. Bush tried to accomplish immigration reform, but he was shot down by his own party. And so our community started seeing the Republican Party as being anti-immigrant. And certainly within these last few years, right, that we have absolutely seen that with the so-called Chinese virus, the Wuhan flu and Kung flu. And even though that's focused on China, the Asian American community as a whole see that as an attack on our community. So that has caused even a more dramatic shift in these last few years towards the Democratic Party.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm going to jump to Don. Don Howard, thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for the invitation to speak with you.
Absolutely. We heard Congresswoman Williams use the example of one of her constituents, a blind constituent. And I saw your reaction when she talked about the blind constituent who said the new law in Georgia would not allow her to have assistance as she voted. How did that strike you? I saw your body language shift.
So every comment I make, think about intersectionality, because it's people of color with disabilities too, and everybody should have the right to vote. And that really bothered me, because we need to be making voting possible for the person in the motorized wheelchair, with one step being a huge barrier. With the, for the intellectually disabled young person who may not be able to understand complicated language. For the deaf individual who, if they grew up with American Sign Language, English, it's their second language. For people who are blind, who want basic information about voting, who may go to the website like the rest of us, but use screen readers. Those websites need to be accessible for screen readers. In Colorado, we have mail-in voting or drop boxes, and that just makes it really easy for most of us to take our time, read the information, and do it on the kitchen table. But if you have the opportunity, open drop boxes. Make it accessible. Let people help others vote, not influence. Everybody has the right to make their own decisions, but help, yes. So think about, there are so many different ways that people with disabilities might be blocked from voting. Open your eyes, switch your thinking. There are ways to get around those, and we must.
Oh, that's awesome. Don, let me ask you a question. There's a, what does being blocked from the ballot specifically look like for people with disabilities?
Well, I've said many of the different ways that people could be blocked from the vote. Mm-hmm. Stairs, language, and people may go to the polls. There may be equipment to allow people to vote independently, but poll workers need to know how to use those machines and what to do if there's a malfunction. Again, think about the ways people could be blocked.
Well, we're going to come back to you in just a moment. I'm going to jump to Rob to get him in here before we go to Q&A to the audience. Rob, FairVote have been working for, advocating for fair elections, access to voting all over the country for quite some time. Make it easy, right? And help people make good choices, but help make it easy for them to vote. Tell us about FairVote, the organization, and while you're doing that, tell us how you all are viewing what's happening, and does that shift how you're approaching your work?
Yeah. Well, thank you, Mayor, and thanks to all the people here. This is quite an extraordinary gathering, and my panelists are terrific, and so I'm learning a lot every minute. And one thing I just wanted to say as part of a national organization is we were talking a little bit before this started, this panel, about the fact that a lot of national organizations like mine often work together, but they generate a lot of ideas, but we really want to have a place to channel them. And if mayors on the front lines and cities are making this commitment to the right to vote, which we're seeing this conference, I think there's a lot of willing partners, and it would be actually, I'll create an opportunity for us to channel ideas to you and partner as much as we can. So FairVote's been around a while. I'll say I came of age in the sort of political age in the 1980s, and one part of that sort of international developments that kind of helped, I think, make me think about what's possible. So the Berlin Wall changed, and that didn't seem possible to have the Cold War end the way it did so suddenly. Actually, the longest paper I wrote in college was about how South Africa's apartheid system was so entrenched that we would have to wait another generation for a conversation about change. And I specifically said, even if Nelson Mandela gets out of jail, it just won't make a difference, right? And then it did make a difference, right? And to see that change is possible. So I think the mode of FairVote has been, I guess, sort of turning ideas into action based on sort of fundamental principles about what would be better for our democracy. And that's actually very much in keeping with the way that our Constitution sets things up. There's very little said about elections, right? There's sort of the Electoral College is created, but what states do with that is up to states. So we are supposed to be leading this conversation. The laboratories of democracy, and cities can be that laboratory, states can be. So sort of some big ideas. We sort of looked at the idea of the right to vote, and it's not actually clearly established in the Constitution. Right. And that's something we've worked with Congressman Jesse Jackson Jr. when he was in Congress on that idea, and have worked with others, but also saying what can we do in tandem with that living up to that principle. So the idea of looking at voter registration and our voter registration systems being so inefficient, it was FairVote that kind of first said, well, here's some ways we could automate that and make it something that we could just lift registration up so much more. The Electoral College system, which I think a lot of us have all encountered and maybe gotten opinions about by 7th grade, there's a sense of helplessness about it, but there was this proposal that we jumped on and helped develop the National Popular Vote Plan, which actually was on the ballot here in Colorado last year and was upheld in a referendum and has passed in 15 states and DC, and which would allow states to come together to ensure that the presidential candidate gets the most votes, gets elected. Now I'll mention sort of one other sort of example is when we have crowded fields, when we have more than 2 people run, if you only get to vote for one, you're sort of leaving information about what you think on the table, and has real ramifications. So Colorado, another Colorado example, in its presidential primary last year, there were actually 15% more votes cast than we were counted publicly, because they were cast for candidates who had withdrawn. And the Colorado law says if you've withdrawn, we won't even count them. We won't even say they voted. There were 4 states that actually use a ranked choice voting ballot. The ranked choice ballot is where you say, here's my first choice, but here's my second choice as my backup choice. Here's my third choice. And in that event, in those states, they actually had a big share of votes also going for withdrawn candidates, but 90% of them ranked an active candidate as a backup choice and ended up counting. So ranked choice voting is a tool that sort of helps accommodate choice. So there's a lot of ways that we can make votes count. We should sort of look for our big principles, and I think we can always find ways to turn them into action.
So different ways of voting, different ways of helping folks exercise their choice in voting is all part of this, right? We should be making it easier and more convenient for people, period. We are at the point where we're going to open the floor for questions. If you have a question, I think we have folks who are floating with microphones. Who's got the microphone? Is there a question on the floor? Don't be shy. If not, I have a question I wanted to ask all of you, and I want you to jump in here on this. Yesterday, the U.S. Senate failed to pass the Freedom to Vote Act for a third time. And I'm real curious what your thoughts and feelings were when you heard that. Rob, you got a quick response?
Well, I'll just say one, the sort of the hypocrisy of the moment, right? Which is that one of the lines for against this is that, you know, it's not for Congress to act on voting. But there's a whole history of Congress acting on voting. It's actually built upon, you know, states and cities showing the way, and it's happened again and again and again. And actually several Republicans in their leadership roles were people who passed the Help America Vote Act back in 2002, and et cetera, et cetera. So that there's a false conversation going on about this right that we have to somehow elevate. And I think it's, you know, there has to obviously be a conversation about the filibuster.
Very good. Don?
So I was very disappointed. We need to think about the federal government does impact the states along many rules. And we just had an election where people had access, easy access, and millions and millions and millions of people voted. So if we make it convenient and easy, people want to be involved. Let's do it now.
Yeah. John, let's have you and Carlotta respond before we go to the floor.
Three quick things. First is this has a real impact on Asian Americans. Asian Americans in Georgia, as an example, 40% of them voted by mail, which outstrips the general average, which was around 34%. So we care about voting by mail for language reasons, for other access reasons. And so things like that, things like voter ID matter to us. Second is that the filibuster has always been, or frankly often has been used as a racist instrument. If you think about how it's been used in the civil rights context, Southern state senators, and at that point Democratic senators, prevented civil rights legislation from getting to the floor. So we have to recognize that for what it is and not think about this as an institutional issue. Or if it is, it's an institutional racist issue at times.
Say there.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the last thing I would say is, I really appreciate what you said about the fact that we have to keep taking steps, and it's the steps in a journey. Because I think for some of us, when we see things like this, we lose heart, we lose energy, we're like, oh, this is never gonna get done. But the steps that you guys took, literally physical steps, give us a path.
Yeah.
And we appreciate it.
All right. Well said. Ms. LaNier?
It has been disappointing, and with the vote yesterday, and my feeling is that we have got to hold Congress responsible. Responsibility, it needs we need to keep their feet to the fire, is really what it boils down to. And the right to vote is so important. I just don't have any other words for the fact that the powers that be in Washington right now are just being handled by others. And unfortunately, that's affecting all of us. But it is one situation where we really do have to take one thing at a time. And having to go back and reenact the Voters' Rights Act, you know, those are the things that that was progressive. There was a lot of progress during those days. And then all of a sudden, you know, things are sliding back. And again, I really do feel it has been that complacency that took place in a period of time there that we did not continue to discuss like is being discussed today and working towards a better union.
Right, I appreciate that. Mayor Hardy Davis has a question.
Thank you, Mayor Hancock. This question is to Ms. LaNier. First, thank you for what you have done to blaze a path for us,
Sure.
the Otis Mosses of the world and yourselves. My question to you is, what message do you have for my generation so that we do not become complacent in this season, because this fight is so important?
Well, I really do feel that what you're doing today is helpful. Is no question about that. But you know, it can't be in these little rooms. You got to go out and get the masses. Unfortunately, a murder takes place of George Floyd, but look what took place in this country. It made me feel good to see black, white, brown, green, whatever, together out there protesting what took place in Minneapolis. And we have to do that again now. We have to, you know, they only listen in Washington when we're doing something as a large group of people. And I think you have to take whatever ideas come out of this and take it back to your communities and spread the word. It's going to take young people, and you cannot leave them out. Mm-hmm. You cannot leave young people out. They have a way of movement within their own community. And if you give them the right information, not beat it into them, but make it accessible for them to understand why. I spoke to a group here in Denver at East High School, and it was time for, about this time now, to vote. And I just suggested to them to go home and ask your parents to do one thing for them, for the kid itself. Please, if you're not registered to vote, please register to vote and go vote. And you know what? I had 6 kids in that class that raised their hands and said they were already registered to vote. Now that, to me, was great. And these are high school kids that had made the age cutoff where they could go and register to vote. So don't discount them. That, in my opinion, is what needs to be done.
Any other question from the floor?
I appreciate that. Name's Andre Canty, part of Cities United. Our vision is safe, healthy, and hopeful communities for young black men and boys. So I was going to ask about, it's kind of related to the question around generations, but more about coalition building and, building across people regardless of sectors, right? So this for anybody on the panel or any of y'all. So how can we reach people cross sector, cross generation? Of course, a lot of these are bigger than this room, but how we reach people like across the aisle? Now, it can mean anything, right? Nonprofits, young people, all those things. That can take its own panel, but again, how you reach across people and how you build coalitions.
Go ahead, Don.
I think you talk to them about issues that really impact their lives and how the vote can make a difference. and how the people that they vote for can influence policy, like affordable housing. Here in Colorado, we have affordable housing. You can get people of color, teachers, nurses, people of disabilities, all care about that issue. What idea?
Issues, yes, go ahead, Rob.
I just wanted to say that we do have a strong majority behind us, and I think that's important to keep in mind, which is, like say when Florida voted on restoration of voting rights for people with felony convictions, it got more than 65% of the vote, or at least more than 60% of the vote, in a year when Republicans were winning the governor's race. And there are a lot of people ready to support voting. So even these voter suppression laws are rarely super direct. I mean, the water and line thing is appalling, but a lot of them are more, I don't know, tactical or you know, because they're not supported really. So there is a coalition that we can imagine there. And I just wanted to lift up one thing about last year. Just about last year is that it was the highest voter turnout of the voting age population in history. There sometimes says it was higher back in 1900, but in 1900, more than half of the adult population was not able to vote.
Right.
This was the highest ever. And you think about 19 months ago and the arrival of COVID, that wasn't clear that that was going to happen. And there was a lot of activity and a lot of things that happened, including Republican secretaries of state. You know, there were some things because we rallied, and I just want to say, and just to say, a lot of the ways we were able to rally was because Denver had set such a good model on how to handle voting by mail. So, anyway, which gets back to the city thing. But there is that sort of fundamental coalition opportunity that we don't have to be fearful of.
We have, I've been given the signal. This panel was about the other groups that need to be discussed during this voter rights challenge, and also has a frame recognizing that we have an obligation, a responsibility to those who are in front of us and behind us to vote or to get this right. So I heard some themes: complacency. Ask the question, who dropped the baton? I think we all bear some responsibility there. Everyone has a right to vote. Everyone has a right to their own choices. Don't go get the masses and don't count out the next generation, I think was also very clear. Think differently about how you vote and the opportunities to vote. Rob, you said that. And we got to think differently as we approach this. And then, you know, John, appreciate you being here and recognizing and making the point that we have a responsibility to recognize that everybody has a right in this game, and that we got to make sure we're inclusive as we approach voter rights, right? Not expect others to do, but when we talk about this, it includes all of us. So will you all give this panel a round of applause and thank them for helping us in discussion. Thank you. Clarence, it's on you.
Wow. What an amazing panel. What a great way of helping all of us expand the way in which we think the impact of voting has on the lives of people. And
Right.
it just opened my entire vision of what we talked about, the purpose of this panel, Mayor.
Absolutely.
So, congratulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good
Really
session.
did. And so, you know, in expanding the way in which we look at who should be engaged and how should we engage them, I did see a young man had the microphone, and we want to hear your voice. I heard it in the van coming here. You talked a lot of noise when we were coming in from the airport. So get the mic. Go ahead. Give him the mic. I want to give you that chance. You were Cities United as well?
Yeah, so
I wanted some young voices in this room, too.
I had to write this question down so I wouldn't forget, but it was for Miss LaNier. It's crazy because I heard her story ever since elementary throughout high school, so just goes to show that this history of oppression isn't that far off. So yeah, I'm here representing Cities United, and we're an organization that aims to reduce the epidemic of homicides and shootings among young black men and boys ages 14 to 24. So with you being a part of one of the most transformational events of the civil rights movement, in your own words, how do you think this conversation surrounding voters' rights will help us create these happy, healthy, and most importantly, hopeful communities for young black men, women, and children?
I was taking off my microphone and didn't know that you were speaking to me. Should I take this? You know, it goes back to me, it's foundational sort of thing for me. You have to know your history. You have to know your family's history. You have to know your values. And find those groups of people that are like-minded, in a sense, to give you the power to do what is necessary, to collaborate with others that are going along the path that you are going on. And young people have to get involved, and I know that is something that you're doing, hopefully, and work with those young people. True enough, they want instant gratification, and that is not how it's done, unfortunately. And we're going to have to learn the patience in getting things done. So I don't know whether I probably didn't hear all of the beginning of your question, but that's how I see it with young people and all of the things that are happening among especially African American, well, actually men of color, things that are taking place in our communities throughout the country. So we have to speak up. You have to mobilize. You have to collaborate. And not just be the person to do whatever it is. You have to have a support system. And with that support, I think change can take place. And keep this in mind. This is not a sprint. This is a marathon. It really is. And John Lewis made that comment to me many years ago. The things that the Little Rock Nine did were, as high school students, he was in college. And that is how he got his people together. He felt, if these are teenagers doing this, and I am here in college, maybe I need to speak up and do some things that really needs to get done within our country. So we all have a responsibility. So I don't know whether I gave you the complete answer, but anyway, to your question, but that's how I see things.
Thank you so much.
Wow.
Sure.
All right, so we've had some amazing moments, Mayor. That, to me, was a drop the mic moment. We can go home, pack up our stuff, because that's the conversation that needs to be had. One of my staff members, Shantae, showed me this video of generational folks having conversations like what we just saw here today. And so thank you for the question, and thank you so much for that answer. What an amazing panel. So we've had a long day, and I want you guys to be patient. We got the best session breakout, the last one for today. And it is going to be out of this world, what you guys are going to talk about. I'm making this up a little bit because I want y'all to, I want y'all to go into this last session with the same feeling that you started with this morning. A little energy, a little attitude that we need to make sure that we persevere. And that this last panel was a way of inspiring us to show that we really do need to keep going. So with that, we're going to ask you to go to your next session, but I got something for you that's going to motivate y'all to get there. Go. You ready? We are one. Y'all don't know that song? That's a little maze. All right, let's go to our session. Then we go to the reception and then the dinner, which is also going to be great.